The Alpha King's pup was born deaf, until the Wolfless Omega pulled out. Something that shocked him. He didn't flinch, Trevor. I dropped a steel basin by the crib, and he didn't blink. Trevor Adams stared at his son. Thunder rattled the study, yet the infant gazed up, utterly oblivious. "Are you saying he's broken?" Trevor growled. "I'm saying," the healer whispered, "that a king who cannot hear his enemies cannot lead. The boy is deaf. In our world, silence is a death sentence." Trevor tightened his grip. He felt a heartbeat, not a defect. But among wolves, love was often the first casualty of survival. 3 years had passed, and the silence had only grown louder, transforming from a secret tragedy into a public spectacle. The great hall of the Silver Moon Pack was a cavernous space designed to intimidate, filled with the scent of pine, old blood, and the electric tension of 100 restless wolves. Dust motes danced in the shafts of late-afternoon light that pierced the high windows, illuminating the grim faces of the council elders. Trevor sat on the obsidian throne, a seat carved from the volcanic rock of the ancestors. At 28, he was a physical masterpiece of the goddess Moon, broad-shouldered, lethal, with hair as black as a raven's wing and eyes that burned with gold fire. But today, he looked ancient. His posture was rigid, his knuckles white as they gripped the armrests. In the center of the room, a 3-year-old boy lay on the expensive Persian rug, screaming. It wasn't the temper tantrum of a spoiled child. It was a guttural tearing sound, the sound of a soul trapped in a glass box, battering against the walls. Dylan was thrashing, his small, unshifted claws extended, shredding the fabric beneath him. He had knocked over a ceremonial vase, shattering it, and now he was beating his small fists against the floor until they were bruised. He couldn't hear the shattering. He couldn't hear his own screams. He could only feel the vibration of his rage, and it wasn't enough. "He is feral, Trevor. You have to stop lying to yourself." The voice cut through the chaos, smooth, cool, and sharp as a scalpel. Jenny Carter stood near the dais, her arms crossed over her chest. As the Beta's daughter, she was royalty in her own right, tall, blonde, and possessing a beauty that was as cold as it was breathtaking. She had been circling the empty spot of Luna since Trevor's first wife died in childbirth, waiting for her moment to strike. "He's not feral," Trevor ground out, though the conviction in his voice was fraying like old rope. He stood up, his massive frame casting a long shadow over the weeping child. "Dylan! Enough!" He used the alpha voice, the command tone imbued with psychic dominance that forced every wolf in a 10-mile radius to submit, to drop to their bellies and whine in instinctual obedience. The council members flinched. The guards stiffened. But Dylan didn't even pause. He kept screaming, lost in his silent, chaotic void, immune to the power that ruled the rest of them. The murmur of the gathered wolves rose like a rising tide, dangerous and judging. He defies the Alpha command. He is broken. A king must have a voice. This pup has nothing. Jenny stepped closer, invading Trevor's personal space with the confidence of a predator who smells blood. She placed a manicured hand on his tense forearm. "Look at him, Trevor. He has no language. He has no connection to the pack mind. He is a liability. The northern packs are already testing our borders. They smell weakness. If you keep him here, you endanger us all." She leaned in, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper that only he could hear. "Send him to the sanctuary in the mountains. They deal with defectives. It is the merciful thing to do." Trevor pulled his arm away as if burned. Revulsion coiled in his gut. The sanctuary was a polite euphemism for a prison asylum where wolves with madness or deformities were left to rot until the moon took them back. "He is my son," Trevor snarled, his eyes flashing a dangerous, molten gold. "He is a mistake," Jenny countered, her eyes hard. And as long as he remains heir, the pack sees you as a father first and a king second. You cannot afford that luxury." Trevor looked down at Dylan. The boy had finally exhausted himself. He stopped screaming and lay curled in a tight ball, his thumb in his mouth, his chest heaving with silent sobs. He looked impossibly small in the vast judging hall, fragile and utterly, devastatingly alone. Trevor descended the dais steps. He knelt, reaching out to touch the boy's shoulder, a desperate attempt to offer comfort. Dylan flinched violently. He snapped his teeth at Trevor's hand, eyes wild with confusion and fear. The council gasped. Treason! To bite the alpha was death, even for a child. Trevor didn't recoil. He just stared at the small, terrified creature that was his flesh and blood. He felt a crushing weight of failure that no enemy army had ever inflicted upon him. He loved the boy with a ferocity that scared him. But he couldn't reach him. It was as if Dylan was trapped on the other side of a thick sheet of ice, and Trevor had no hammer to break it. "Take him to the nursery," Trevor ordered, his voice hollow, stripped of all authority. "Clear the room, everyone out. I need to think," as the guards scrambled to collect the weeping child, handling him like a bomb that might go off. Trevor sank back onto his throne. He rubbed his temples, the migraine that had plagued him for 3 years pulsing behind his eyes. He needed a miracle. But wolves didn't believe in miracles. They believed in teeth and claws, and those were the very things his son seemed to lack. Kathy Moore scrubbed the stone floor of the West Wing hallway, the chemical sting of lemon and industrial bleach burning her nose. Her knees ached against the cold stone, and her hands were raw and red, but she kept her head down. Invisibility was her superpower. Invisibility was her shield. In the hierarchy of the Silver Moon Pack, Kathy was beneath the dirt she cleaned. She was an Omega, but worse. She was Wolfless. At 16, the age of maturity, her shift had never come. The moon had risen, her bones had remained human, and her mind had remained silent. She had no wolf spirit, no heightened senses, no telepathic link to the pack. She was, for all intents and purposes, a fragile human in a world of monsters. Her stepbrother Dylan, no, not the prince, but her cruel cousin, Dylan Moore, a coincidence of names that stung every time she heard the prince called, had kicked her out of the family home the day her parents died in a rogue attack. Now, at 23, she lived in the servants' quarters in the basement, earning her keep by cleaning up after the shifters who viewed her as a genetic dead end. But Kathy had a secret weapon. Because she was wolfless, the pack had sent her away for her education to a human boarding school, a place to dump the duds before recalling them for servitude. There, she hadn't just learned math and literature. She had volunteered at a center for children with different abilities. She had learned that different didn't mean broken. She had learned that language wasn't just spoken. She wrung out her rag, her grey eyes darting toward the heavy oak doors of the nursery wing at the end of the hall. She had been watching the little prince for months. Everyone else, the council, the alpha, even his father, saw a monster. A feral, uncontrollable beast. Kathy saw something else entirely. She saw a brilliant, frustrated mind trapped in a sensory deprivation tank. She saw how Dylan's eyes tracked the movement of dust motes in the sunlight with predator-like focus. She saw how he pressed his ear to the floorboards, feeling the vibrations of footsteps long before anyone entered the room. He wasn't stupid. He was bored, and he was suffocatingly lonely. "Move it, Wolfless," a guard grunted, stepping deliberately onto the wet patch she had just cleaned. He didn't even look at her. She was furniture to him. Kathy waited until his heavy boots faded around the corner. She stood up, wiping her hands on her frayed apron. She checked the hallway. Empty. The nanny, a flighty young wolf named Sarah, who spent more time flirting with the sentries than watching the prince, was currently down in the kitchens stealing pastries. Kathy took a deep breath, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. If she were caught entering the royal wing without orders, the punishment was exile. To be a wolfless human exiled into the wild lands was a death sentence. Or worse, Jenny Carter, who looked at Kathy with a mixture of disgust and suspicion, would find a reason to have her eliminated. "Do it," a voice inside her whispered. It wasn't a wolf spirit, just her own stubborn conscience. "That little boy is drowning in silence, and you're the only one with a life raft." She smoothed her messy bun, checked the corridor one last time, and slipped inside the nursery. The room was opulent, filled with expensive, untouched toys. Sunlight streamed in, mocking the gloom that hung over the occupant. Dylan was sitting in the corner, staring at the blank wall, rocking back and forth. Thump, thump, thump. The rhythm was soothing to him, Kathy knew. It was a way to feel his own body in space when the world gave him no feedback. She didn't walk up behind him. That would startle him and cause a meltdown. Instead, she walked heavily, stomping her boots slightly so the vibrations would travel through the floorboards. Dylan stopped rocking immediately. He froze. He turned his head, his golden eyes narrowing in defensive anticipation. He hissed, a mimicry of the wolves he saw around him. He expected her to yell. He expected her to grab him. He expected the suffocating pity that rolled off the adults in waves. Kathy did none of those things. She knelt on the floor, a respectful 10 feet away from him. She kept her face neutral, soft. She didn't speak. Speaking was useless here. It was just noise he couldn't decode. Slowly, deliberately, she raised her hand. She tapped her chest twice. Then she pointed to him. Dylan watched, mesmerizingly still. His curiosity battled with his fear. She reached into the deep pocket of her apron. She didn't pull out a treat. She didn't pull out a plush toy. She pulled out a flashlight. It was a small, cheap, tactical light she used for cleaning under heavy furniture. She clicked it on. The beam cut through the dust, hitting the floor in a bright circle. Dylan flinched, then his eyes went wide. Kathy clicked it off. She clicked it on. Off. On. Off. On. The pattern was mesmerizing. Dylan scrambled forward on his hands and knees, drawn like a moth. He reached for the light. Kathy didn't pull it away. She handed it to him, her fingers brushing his small, cold hand. He held it like it was the crown jewels. He clicked the button. Light. Click. Dark. He looked up at her, a massive, toothy grin spreading across his tear-stained face, the first genuine smile anyone had seen on the prince in months. It transformed him from a monster into a breathless, happy child. Kathy smiled back, tears pricking her eyes. Then she took his hand. She placed his small palm against her throat. She took a deep breath and began to hum a low, resonant note. Dylan's eyes widened further. He could feel the sound. The vibration traveled from her vocal cords, through her skin, into his fingertips. He pulled his hand back, looked at it with wonder, then placed it back on her throat. He opened his own mouth and tried to mimic the vibration. It was a garbled, frog-like croak, but to Kathy, it was the most beautiful conversation she'd ever heard. "What do you think you are doing?" The voice was thunder. It didn't come from a throat. It seemed to come from the very air itself. Kathy froze. The blood drained from her face, leaving her ghost white. She didn't have to turn around to know who was standing in the doorway. The pheromones of rage were so potent, they practically tasted like copper and ash in the air. It was the Alpha King, and he looked ready to kill. Trevor had come to check on his son, hoping to find him asleep so he could sit by the crib and apologize to the unconscious boy for his failure as a father. Instead, he found the wolfless cleaning girl on the floor with his heir, her hands on the prince's person. Rage, hot and blinding, surged through him. It was a primal instinct. Protect the pup. He crossed the room in 2 massive strides, the floorboards groaning under his weight. He grabbed Kathy by the back of her grey uniform and hauled her to her feet, as if she weighed nothing. "I said," Trevor snarled, his face inches from hers, his canines lengthening into points, his eyes swirling with the chaotic energy of the wolf. "What are you doing to my son?" Kathy trembled, her feet dangling inches off the ground. She was terrified. Her instincts screamed that a predator had her by the throat, and she was seconds away from having her neck snapped. But then she looked down. Dylan. Dylan wasn't cowering. He wasn't screaming. He was standing up, holding the flashlight, looking confused and angry that his new friend, the source of the light and the vibration, had been snatched away. I was teaching him, Alpha," Kathy choked out, forcing the words past the lump of terror in her throat. "Teaching him." Trevor dropped her. She stumbled back, hitting the wall hard enough to bruise, but she stayed upright. "You are an Omega, a Wolfless one at that. You have nothing to teach a king's bloodline." "Did you hurt him?" "Why was he touching your throat?" "He was feeling the sound," Kathy said, her voice shaking, but gaining a strange, steely strength. She straightened her apron, her hands trembling. "He isn't broken, Alpha. He's just bored out of his mind." Trevor stared at her. The audacity. No one spoke to him like that. Not the council. Not Jenny. Certainly not a cleaner. He is deaf. He cannot learn the ways of the wolf. He cannot hear the commands. "Then stop trying to make him a wolf and let him be a boy first," Kathy snapped. The silence that followed was heavy. She realized too late that she had just insulted the Alpha King to his face. Trevor stepped forward, looming over her, a mountain of muscle and repressed violence. "Give me one reason why I shouldn't throw you in the dungeons for touching the prince without permission." "I can prove it," Kathy said breathlessly. She wasn't fighting for her life anymore. She was fighting for Dylan's. "I can prove he understands." "How? He doesn't know commands. He doesn't know his name." "He doesn't know your name for him," Kathy corrected, her grey eyes locking onto his gold ones. "He knows himself." She stepped around the Alpha, a move so dangerous it was almost suicidal. She knelt back down in front of Dylan. Trevor watched, his muscles coiled, ready to tear her apart if she made a wrong move. Kathy reached into her apron pocket again. "If you pull out a weapon," Trevor warned, his voice a low rumble. "It's not a weapon," Kathy said. "It's a bridge." She pulled out a stack of cards. They were homemade, drawn on the back of recycled glamorous pack announcements she had fished out of the trash. Kathy had used charcoal to sketch simple, high-contrast images: a wolf, a moon, a bowl of food, a bed, fire. Trevor scoffed. "Pictures? You think showing him pictures will fix a broken lineage?" "Watch," she commanded. Kathy spread 3 cards on the floor, a ball, a bone, and a cup. Then she looked at Dylan. She didn't speak. She tapped her chin with her thumb, then brought her fists together. Dylan stared. His focus was absolute. She repeated the motion. "Sign for ball." Dylan looked at the cards, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. He looked back at Kathy's hands, mimicking the movement with his own small fingers. Then, with a speed that shocked Trevor, Dylan's chubby hand shot out and slapped the card with the ball on it. Trevor stopped breathing. The air left his lungs in a rush. Kathy didn't stop. She shuffled the cards. She put down 3 new ones. Sleep, bed, eat, bowl, angry, fire. She pressed her palms together and tilted her head against them. Sign for sleep. Dylan didn't hesitate. He pointed to the bed. Then Dylan did something that nearly brought Trevor to his knees. The toddler looked at his father. He looked at the looming, dark energy radiating from the Alpha. He pointed at Trevor. Then Dylan scrunched up his face, raised his hands like claws, and slapped the card for angry, fire. He was calling his father angry. Kathy let out a breathless, triumphant laugh. "He says your energy is loud, Alpha." Trevor stared at the boy. For 3 years, he had stared at a blank wall, believing there was nothing behind it. Now, the wall had vanished. His son was there. He had been there the whole time, screaming to be heard, and Trevor had been speaking the wrong language. The emotion that hit Trevor wasn't relief. It was a tidal wave of guilt, awe, and a fierce, protective love. He looked at the Wolfless girl. She was plain, wearing a uniform 2 sizes too big, her hair a mess. But in this moment, she held more power than the entire council combined. She had done the impossible. "How?" Trevor whispered, his voice cracking. "How did you do this?" "I learned American Sign Language when I lived with humans," Kathy said softly. "Wolves rely so much on telepathy and hearing that we forgot that communication isn't about sound. It's about connection." She gathered her cards. "He has a vocabulary of about 50 words already, Alpha. I've been sneaking in for a month. I'm sorry." Trevor looked from the cards to the girl. "You've been teaching him in secret?" "I knew they'd send him away," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Jenny Carter talks about the sanctuary. I couldn't let that happen. He's smart, Alpha. He's smarter than any pup his age I've ever seen." Trevor looked at his son, who was now clicking the flashlight on and off, illuminating the Alpha's boots with a grin. "He called me angry," Trevor murmured, a strange, crooked smile tugging at his lips. "He's observant," Kathy shrugged, "and you are angry." Suddenly, the heavy oak doors swung open. Jenny Carter strode in, followed by 2 armed guards. "I heard shouting," Jenny announced, her eyes scanning the room. She saw Kathy kneeling on the floor, her lip curled in a sneer. "What is this filth doing in the royal nursery? Trevor, did she attack you? Guards, remove her! Throw her in the cells!" The guards stepped forward to grab Kathy. Kathy flinched, dropping her head, expecting the rough handling she was used to. "Halt!" The command cracked through the room like a whip. It was the Alpha voice, but different this time. It wasn't just commanding. It was protective. The guards froze mid-step. Trevor stood up. He didn't look at Jenny. He walked over to Kathy and placed a massive hand on her shoulder. A protective, claiming gesture that made Jenny's eyes widen in shock. "She is not filth," Trevor said, his voice deadly calm, vibrating with a new kind of authority. "She is the only person in this entire pack who had the sense to listen to a king who cannot speak." He looked down at Kathy, his golden eyes burning with a sudden, intense curiosity. "What is your name, Wolfless?" "Kathy, sir." "Kathy Moore." Trevor nodded slowly. "Well, Kathy Moore, you are no longer a cleaner. As of this moment, you are the royal tutor." Jenny gasped, stepping forward. "Trevor, you can't be serious. She is an Omega. She has no wolf. She cannot raise an heir. It is an insult to our traditions." Trevor turned to Jenny, his expression hardening into stone. "Tradition nearly cost me my son. She has done in 5 minutes what you and the council failed to do in 3 years." She reached him. Trevor looked back at Dylan, who was watching the adults with wide, intelligent eyes, holding his flashlight like a beacon. "She reached my son," Trevor whispered. "And for that, she has my protection." But as Trevor stood close to Kathy, he noticed something else. A faint, almost imperceptible scent coming from her. It wasn't the scent of a wolf. It was something sweeter, wilder, like ozone before a lightning strike. Something that made his inner wolf, which had been dormant and depressed for years, suddenly lift its head and sniff the air. The Wolfless girl had secrets, and for the first time in a long time, the Alpha King was desperate to uncover them. The packhouse was in an uproar, a hive of whispered scandals and sharp glances. The news that the Alpha King had appointed a wolfless servant, a genetic dead end, as the prince's private tutor had spread like wildfire through the ranks. To the traditionalists, it was an insult to the hierarchy, a crack in the foundation of their strength. To Jenny Carter, it was a declaration of war. But inside the nursery, there was peace, a sanctuary of silence and light. For the next 2 weeks, Trevor spent every spare moment he had in the nursery. He told himself it was to monitor the boy's progress, to ensure the new methods were working, and that the Wolfless girl wasn't a security risk. But his beta, a perceptively quiet man named Marcus, noticed the truth. The Alpha was leaving War Council meetings early. He was ignoring Jenny's aggressive requests for private dinners. He was drawn to the West Wing like a moth to a flame. Trevor sat in the oversized velvet armchair in the corner of the room, pretending to read border reports on a tablet. In reality, his golden eyes were fixed on the pair on the rug. Kathy was different from the other females in the pack. She didn't preen. She didn't wear the revealing silks or emit the cloying, desperate pheromones of she-wolves vying for a mate. She wore loose trousers and oversized sweaters, smelling of rain, old paper, and lemon soap. It was a scent that was inexplicably grounding to Trevor's hyperactive senses. "Watch, Trevor," Kathy said softly, breaking his trance. She didn't call him Alpha in private anymore. She insisted that in this room, he needed to be Dad. Trevor looked up. Kathy was sitting cross-legged across from Dylan. Between them lay a complex, hand-drawn puzzle of a map representing the pack grounds. Kathy signed quickly, her hands graceful and fluid, like birds in flight. "Where is the river?" Dylan scanned the map, his brow furrowed in that serious expression that was a miniature replica of his father's. His small finger traced the blue line winding through the charcoal trees. He looked up, his face lighting up, and signed back. Water. Fish. Swim. Trevor felt that familiar tightness in his throat, a mix of pride and old grief. He knows what a river is. He's never left the pack house grounds. I was too ashamed to take him out. "He sees pictures in books," Kathy said, brushing a stray lock of brown hair behind her ear. Her eyes were gentle, lacking the judgment he was used to. "And he has an imagination, Trevor. Just because he can't hear the water rushing doesn't mean he can't dream of the current." She turned to Dylan and signed, "Show Dad." Dylan scrambled up, grabbed the map, and ran to Trevor's chair. He didn't hesitate this time. He shoved the map onto Trevor's knees and pointed to the river, then pointed to Trevor's chest. Then he made a sign Trevor didn't recognize, 2 fingers hooked together, pulling tight. "What is that?" Trevor asked, looking at Kathy for translation. Kathy blushed, a soft pink rising on her pale cheeks that made Trevor's pulse skip a beat. It's the sign for friend or connect, but he uses it for pack. To him, a pack isn't about hierarchy or dominance. It's about being linked." Trevor looked down at his son. "Linked. Pack," Trevor whispered, testing the word. He clumsily mimicked the sign, his large, scarred warrior hands struggling with the delicate movement. Dylan beamed. He climbed onto Trevor's lap, something he had never dared to do before, and placed his small, warm hands over Trevor's large ones, correcting his finger placement with serious precision. The contact was electric. For a shifter, touch was everything. It was communication, acceptance, a transfer of bond. Trevor buried his nose in his son's hair, inhaling the scent of milk and innocence, realizing he had starved himself of this affection for 3 years. "Thank you," Trevor mouthed to Kathy over Dylan's head. Kathy smiled, but her eyes held a glimmer of sadness. "He learns fast. Too fast for this room. He needs to go outside, Trevor. He needs to see the territory he will one day rule. You can't keep him locked in this tower like a princess in a fairy tale." "It's dangerous," Trevor said, his face darkening as the Alpha mask slipped back into place. "The Northern Alpha, Silas, is aggressive. His scouts are watching us. If he sees my heir is different, He will see it as weakness to be exploited. Hiding him is weakness, Kathy challenged, her voice firm. She stood up, looking small but indomitable. Showing him that he belongs to the earth? That is strength. Let the pack see him. Let them see you accepting him. Trevor stared at her. You speak boldly for someone with no claws. I have claws, Kathy murmured, looking at her calloused hands. They just look different. Trevor stood up, holding Dylan against his chest, effortlessly. The boy was heavy, solid reality. Tomorrow, we go to the river. You will come with us. Me? Kathy's eyes widened in genuine alarm. The pack will talk. An Omega accompanying the Alpha and the Prince. Jenny will skin me alive. It breaks every protocol. Let them talk, Trevor growled, stepping closer to her, invading her personal space. The pull he felt toward her was becoming impossible to ignore. It wasn't the instant, overwhelming heat of a fated mate bond. He had felt that with his first wife, and it had burned out in tragedy. This was different. This was a slow burn, a fire built twig by twig, rooted in respect and shared purpose. You are the bridge, Kathy, he said, his voice dropping an octave, vibrating through the floorboards. Without you, I lose him again. I won't let that happen. He reached out, his knuckles brushing the soft skin of her cheek. Kathy stopped breathing. The touch was scorching. And I won't let anyone touch you, he promised. Not Jenny. Not Silas. No one. The trip to the river was a revelation that shook the pack to its core. The wolves watched in stunned silence as their alpha walked through the village, his son riding high on his shoulders, with the wolfless Omega walking by his side, not behind him. They saw Dylan point at a bird and sign bird. They saw Trevor laugh, a booming, rich sound the pack hadn't heard in years, and sign it back. They saw the Alpha King looking not at the horizon, but at the Omega, with a softness that terrified his enemies. But not everyone was happy. From the high balcony of the Beta's estate, Jenny Carter watched through binoculars, her grip crushing the metal railing until it bent. She is bewitching him, Jenny hissed, her voice trembling with jealous rage. Her father, the Beta, stood behind her, looking weary. She is making the boy functional, Jenny. That is good for the pack. A functional heir means stability. It is not good for me. Jenny spun around, her eyes flashing a feral yellow. Trevor was supposed to mourn, fail with the boy, and then turn to me for a new heir, a strong heir, if that defect survives. And if that servant girl keeps playing house with the king, I lose everything. I lose the crown. What will you do? Her father asked, stepping back from her intensity. I will prove that her influence is dangerous, Jenny smiled, a cruel, sharp expression that showed too many teeth. I will prove that a deaf king is a dead king, and that a wolfless nanny is nothing but prey. 2 days later, disaster struck. Trevor was in a high-stakes meeting in the war room, with emissaries from the Southern Alliance, negotiating a treaty to bolster their defenses against the North. Kathy was in the nursery with Dylan, teaching him the signs for colors using a box of prisms. Suddenly, the alarms blared. Intruder. Level red. The sound was ear-splitting. Kathy grabbed Dylan immediately, pulling him under the heavy oak desk. She had drilled this with him. Safe place. Hide. She held a finger to her lips. The heavy doors burst open. It wasn't northern invaders. It was pack guards. Guards Kathy recognized as loyal to the Beta. And striding in behind them was Jenny Carter. Where is he? Jenny demanded, stalking into the room, her voice high and tight. What is going on? Kathy stood up, blocking the desk, her body shielding the boy beneath it. Why are the alarms ringing? A northern scout breached the perimeter. Jenny lied, though the lie was smooth as silk. Trevor is on the front lines. He ordered me to move the pup to the deep bunkers. Kathy hesitated. Her instincts screamed that this was wrong. If the pack was under attack, Trevor would have sent Marcus, or he would have come himself. He wouldn't send the woman who had called his son a mistake. "I'll wait for Marcus," Kathy said, crossing her arms to hide the trembling of her hands. "You will obey a direct order from a superior-ranking wolf," Jenny snarled, her human mask slipping. "Move aside, Wolfless." "No," Kathy said. Jenny didn't waste words. She lunged, grabbing Kathy by the hair and slamming her head against the wall. Kathy saw stars. She slumped to the floor, dazed. Jenny kicked her in the ribs, a brutal, bone-bruising impact. "Run, Dylan!" Kathy signed frantically from the floor, gasping for air. "Run! Hide!" Dylan scrambled out from under the desk. But instead of running, the boy grabbed a heavy wooden block, part of his architectural set, and threw it with all his might. It hit Jenny square in the forehead, drawing blood. Jenny roared, her eyes flashing red. She shifted. The transformation was violent and grotesque in its speed. Bones cracked and reshaped. In seconds, a massive russet wolf stood in the nursery. She wasn't here to save the boy. She was here to ensure an accident happened during the chaos of the alarm. A tragic casualty of war. The wolf snarled and lunged at Dylan. "No!" Kathy screamed. She didn't think. She didn't assess the odds. She threw herself across the room, landing on top of the boy just as the wolf's jaws snapped shut. Jenny's teeth didn't find the boy's throat. They found Kathy's shoulder. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded in Kathy's body. She screamed, a raw, tearing sound. The wolf shook her like a rag doll, tearing muscle and skin. Kathy curled around Dylan, shielding him with her own breaking body. "Not him. Take me, but not him!" The wolf growled, preparing for the killing bite to the neck. Suddenly, the wall of the nursery exploded. Not the door. The wall. A massive black beast, larger than any normal wolf, crashed through the stone and plaster in a shower of debris. It was the Alpha. It was Trevor. He didn't bother shifting back to human to negotiate. He hit Jenny mid-air, a blur of shadow and fury. His jaws locked onto the russet wolf's neck. The momentum carried them both into the hallway, crashing through antique furniture, destroying everything in their path. The fight was brutal, visceral, and short. An Alpha's rage was a force of nature. Trevor didn't just subdue her, he broke her. He tossed the russet wolf aside like garbage, leaving her broken and whimpering on the floor, subdued but alive to face judgment. Trevor shifted back. He was naked, bleeding from glass cuts, covered in dust, but he didn't care. He scrambled over to the corner of the ruined nursery. "Kathy!" She was pale, a pool of crimson spreading rapidly beneath her on the rug. Her shoulder was a mess of torn flesh. Dylan was sobbing silently, his hands pressing on her wound, trying to stop the red flow like he had seen in the medical books Kathy had shown him. "I'm okay," Kathy whispered, her teeth chattering violently from shock. Her vision was tunneling. "I'm okay. Is he safe?" Trevor looked at her, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. She had thrown herself into the jaws of a shifter to save his son. She, a human frail Omega with no healing factor. "He is safe," Trevor choked out, tears cutting tracks through the dust on his face. He scooped her up in his arms, mindful of her injuries. "And you are the bravest wolf I have ever known." "I'm not a wolf," she slurred, her head lolling against his chest, her consciousness fading. "No," Trevor growled softly, carrying her toward the door as healers rushed in, their faces pale with horror. "You are a queen," Kathy survived, but the pack was fractured, and the cost of survival was high. Jenny Carter was in the dungeons, awaiting trial for attempted regicide. Her father, the Beta, had been stripped of his rank and placed under house arrest. The revelation that high-ranking members had conspired to kill the defective prince shook the Silver Moon Pack to its core. Trust had eroded, but the chaos had a consequence. The internal strife had left the borders weak, the patrols disorganized. Silas, the alpha of the Northern Iron Claw Pack, smelled blood in the water. 3 weeks after the attack in the nursery, Kathy was sitting up in her hospital bed in the medical wing. Her arm was in a sling, heavy bandages covering the angry, slow-healing wounds. Trevor sat beside her, looking exhausted, his stubble thick, his eyes haunted. "The scouts report movement in the north," Trevor said, running a hand through his hair. "Silas knows about the internal conflict. He knows about Dylan. He thinks I have no heir, no beta, and a divided pack. He's coming. Tonight." "You have an heir," Kathy said, her voice raspy but firm. "He is a child, Kathy, and he is deaf. If war comes, I have to lead the fighters in the valley. Who protects him? Who understands him?" "I do," Kathy said. "You can barely walk," Trevor countered, his voice cracking with the strain of holding it together. "I almost lost you. I saw you bleeding out on that floor, and I felt my soul tear. I can't risk you on the battlefield." "I don't need to be on the battlefield. I need to be where I can help." Kathy reached out with her good hand, covering his trembling fist. "Trevor, listen to me. Dylan isn't a liability. He observes things others miss. He feels vibration. He sees movement in the shadows. He is your radar." Trevor sighed, leaning his forehead against their joined hands. "I need you to take him to the safe house, deep in the caves." "No," Kathy said. Trevor looked up, surprised. "No? If you hide him, you prove Jenny right. You prove he is weak. You need to stand your ground here, and there is something else." Kathy hesitated, biting her lip. "Since the bite, since Jenny bit me, something feels different." Trevor frowned, instantly alert. "Different how? Is the wound infected? Is it the venom?" "No, it feels electric." She touched her chest, right over her heart. "I can hear things, not with my ears. Inside, like a static, like voices far away." Trevor stiffened. Omega bites sometimes triggered latent genes, but Kathy was 23. It was impossible for a shift to happen this late. Before he could speak, the air raid sirens began to wail, a long, mournful howl that signaled death. Not a drill. "They're here!" Trevor stood up, his alpha aura flaring, terrifying and majestic. "Stay here. Bar the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a searing, desperate kiss that tasted of goodbyes. "If I don't come back." "You will," she commanded, squeezing his hand. Trevor turned and sprinted out of the room, shifting into his massive black wolf form before he even hit the hallway. Kathy didn't stay in bed. She ripped the IV out of her arm, ignoring the sting. She found Dylan in the adjoining room, hiding under the bed as she had taught him. "Bad wolves," he signed, his eyes wide and dark. "Yes," she signed back, her hands steady. "But we are brave." She led him to the window. The medical wing was on a high hill overlooking the valley. Below, under the pale light of a crescent moon, the battle had begun. It was a sea of fur and teeth, a chaotic swirling mass of violence. The Iron Claw wolves were massive, grey brutes moving like a tide. The Silver Moon wolves were faster, but they were outnumbered 2-1. Kathy watched, her heart in her throat. She saw the massive black wolf that was Trevor. He was a whirlwind of destruction, fighting 3 enemies at once, protecting the entrance to the village. Suddenly, Kathy gasped. She grabbed her head. She didn't hear it with her ears. She felt it, a vibration in her skull, painful and sharp. A sudden, vivid image flashed in her mind. Wolves coming from the east ridge, flanking maneuver, hidden in the tree line, ambush. "What?" she whispered, stumbling back. She looked at Dylan. He was standing by the window, staring intently at the east ridge. He was pointing. His small body was vibrating with tension. He felt it too. Kathy realized with a jolt of shock. It wasn't telepathy. It was the seismic vibration of hundreds of paws hitting the earth on the ridge. Dylan felt the frequency through the floor, and somehow, because Kathy had opened her mind and heart to his silent language, she was interpreting his sensory input into images. They were a conduit. He was the antenna. She was the receiver. Trevor was down in the valley, blind to the ambush coming from above. He couldn't hear them over the clash of bodies and the roar of battle. "We have to warn him," Kathy whispered. She looked around the room. She saw the emergency flare gun in the glass case on the wall. She grabbed a heavy metal tray and smashed the glass with her good elbow. She grabbed the gun. It was heavy in her hand. "Dylan," she signed. "Aim." She pointed to the dark, seemingly empty East Ridge. Dylan understood. He closed his eyes for a second, feeling the vibration, then opened them and pointed his small finger at a specific cluster of trees. Kathy leaned out the window, the cold wind whipping her hair. She aimed where the boy pointed. Trust him. Trust the silence. She fired. The red flare screamed into the night sky, a streak of blood against the stars. It exploded over the East Ridge, bathing the forest in harsh crimson light. It revealed them, 100 enemy wolves, silently creeping down the slope, seconds away from slaughtering Trevor's flank. Down in the valley, Trevor looked up. He saw the enemy. He roared a command that shook the valley. The Silver Moon wolves spun around, meeting the ambush head-on. The element of surprise was lost. The iron claw faltered. Kathy slumped against the windowsill, the gun clattering to the floor. They had done it. But then, the door to the hospital room splintered. Wood chips flew everywhere. A grey wolf, one of Silas's elites, squeezed through the broken frame. It snarled, drool dripping from its yellow fangs. It had seen the flare. It knew who had ruined the ambush. Kathy pushed Dylan behind her. She had no weapon left. She was wounded, weak, and human. The wolf leapt, aiming for her throat. And then, for the first time in 23 years, Kathy felt a tear in the fabric of her soul. A burning, golden heat exploded from her chest, hotter than any fire. She didn't shift. She didn't turn into a wolf. She opened her mouth to scream, and the sound that came out wasn't a voice. It was a shockwave. It was the voice of the earth itself. Stop! The psychic blast hit the enemy wolf like a physical wall. It whimpered, thrown backward mid-air, slamming against the far wall with bone-crushing force. Its brain was scrambled by the sheer pressure of the command. Kathy stared at her hands. They were glowing with a faint, ethereal silver light, pulsing in time with her heartbeat. She wasn't wolfless. She was something ancient, something forgotten. She was a spirit walker. The grey wolf lay unconscious against the hospital wall, twitching. Kathy stood over it, her chest heaving, the silver glow on her hands slowly fading like dying embers. Dylan stared at her, his mouth open in a perfect O. He reached out and touched her hand. He didn't sign, he just smiled, a look of profound recognition on his face. He had felt the blast. It was a language he understood, pure energy. Outside, the tide of the battle had turned. The flare had saved the flank, and Trevor's rage at the attempted ambush had decimated the Iron Claw morale. The howls of the retreating enemy echoed through the valley. Trevor burst into the room minutes later, shifting back to human form mid-stride, grabbing a sheet to cover himself. He was covered in blood and grime, his chest heaving. "I saw the flare," he gasped, scanning the room. He saw the unconscious enemy wolf. He saw Kathy standing there, unharmed but trembling. Did you shoot him?" "No," Kathy whispered, looking at her palms. I spoke to him." Trevor frowned, confused. "You spoke?" "I told him to stop, inside his head." Olivia Wright, the elder healer who had diagnosed Dylan years ago, hobbled into the room behind Trevor. She stopped dead when she saw Kathy. She sniffed the air, her old eyes widening to the size of saucers. "By the moon," Olivia rasped, dropping her cane. She bowed her head, not to Trevor, but to Kathy. "What is it?" Trevor demanded, moving to support Kathy, who looked ready to faint. "She is not Wolfless, Alpha," Olivia whispered, her voice trembling with reverence. "She is a spirit walker. They have not been seen since the First Age. They do not shift into wolves, because their spirit is too vast to be contained in a single form. Their voice commands the spirit of others." Trevor looked at Kathy, the girl who had scrubbed floors, the girl who had been invisible. "You aren't defective," Trevor said, a realization dawning on him that shook the foundations of his beliefs. "You're an evolution." Kathy looked at Dylan. "That's why he connects with me. He doesn't hear sound. He hears spirit. He's not broken either, Trevor. He's just like me. He's sensitive to the energy of the world." Dylan tugged on Trevor's hand. He pointed to Kathy, then made the sign for Queen. Trevor swallowed hard. "Yes, son. I think you're right. The war ended that night. Silas, the Northern Alpha, surrendered when he realized his ambush had failed, and that a spirit walker stood with the Silver Moon pack. Legend said that a spirit walker could sever a wolf from its pack bond with a single thought. No one wanted to test that myth. The weeks that followed were a period of reconstruction, not just of buildings, but of beliefs. Kathy was no longer the cleaner. She wasn't just the tutor. She was the most revered figure in the pack, second only to the king. Yet she refused the pedestal. She still sat on the floor with Dylan. She still wore comfortable clothes instead of royal silks. But the biggest change was in the pack itself. Trevor initiated the silent decree. Sign language became a mandatory subject for all pups in the school. The guards learned hand signals for stealth operations. The council meetings now included an interpreter. Dylan was no longer the silent prince or the feral child. He was the quiet wolf. One afternoon, Trevor found Kathy in the garden. It was autumn, and the leaves were turning gold and crimson. Dylan was chasing butterflies nearby, laughing, a raspy, joyous sound that Trevor never tired of hearing. "He drew this today," Kathy said, handing Trevor a sketchbook. Trevor opened it. It was a drawing of the pack house, but with architectural changes, ramps for the elderly wolves, visual alarm systems with flashing lights instead of just sirens. "He's designing," Trevor said, amazed. "He's 6 years old." "He thinks in structures," Kathy smiled. "He's going to be a great builder, Trevor. Maybe not a warrior in the traditional sense, but he will build a pack that is stronger than any stone." Trevor closed the book. He looked at Kathy. The sunlight caught the stray hairs escaping her bun, creating a halo. "And you?" Trevor asked. "What will you build?" Kathy looked down. "I'm happy just being here, helping him." "That isn't enough for me," Trevor said softly. He dropped to one knee. The garden went silent. Even the birds seemed to hold their breath. Dylan stopped chasing the butterfly and watched, a huge grin splitting his face. He started signing frantically to himself. Finally. 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 "Trevor," Kathy breathed, her hands flying to her mouth. "I was a fool," Trevor said, his voice thick with emotion. "I looked for strength in claws and teeth. I looked for a mate who fit the mold. But you broke the mold. You taught me that love is a language that doesn't need to be spoken to be heard." He pulled a ring from his pocket. It wasn't a diamond. It was a band of woven silver and moonstone, etched with the sign for connection. The two hooked fingers. "Kathy Moore, Spirit Walker, Savior of my son, and Thief of my heart. Will you be my queen? Will you help me lead this pack into a new world?" Kathy didn't speak. She didn't trust her voice. Instead, she raised her hands. She signed, "Yes." Then she signed, "Always." Trevor stood and kissed her. And for a moment, the Spirit Walker and the Alpha King were one. A perfect balance of sound and silence, power and peace. The coronation was unlike any in history. Usually, the new queen would roar to the moon to assert her dominance. But when Kathy stood on the balcony overlooking the thousands of wolves gathered below, she didn't roar. She raised her hands. Below her, thousands of wolves, warriors, elders, pups, raised their hands in return. She signed, "Strength." The crowd mimicked her. She signed, "Family." The crowd followed. She signed, "Pack." A ripple of movement went through the crowd as thousands of hands hooked fingers together. Trevor stood beside her, Dylan in his arms. He wore the crown, but his eyes were on his wife. He saw the way the pack looked at her, not with fear, but with adoration. She hadn't conquered them. She had understood them. Jenny Carter, from her exile in the distant lands, would hear stories of the Silver Moon Pack. She would hear of the deaf prince who became the greatest architect the lands had ever seen, designing fortresses that were impenetrable. She would hear of the Alpha King who ruled with wisdom rather than just wrath. And she would hear of the Wolfless Queen who spoke without words and was heard by the gods. Trevor leaned close to Kathy's ear. "They love you." "They love that they are heard," Kathy corrected gently. She rested her head on his shoulder. "They love that they don't have to scream to be understood." Trevor looked out at the moon, hanging heavy and bright in the sky. For the first time in his life, the silence of the night didn't feel lonely. It felt full. It felt like promise. He looked at his son, who was signing a joke to a guard below. He looked at his mate, who was glowing with that faint, silver light. The curse was broken, not by magic, but by perspective. And as the pack erupted into a silent cheer, thousands of hands waving in the air, the deaf applause, Trevor knew that this was the loudest sound of victory he would ever hear. The Alpha King thought his legacy was broken because it came in silence. He didn't realize that silence is merely a canvas waiting for a different kind of paint. Kathy Moore, the girl everyone overlooked, didn't just teach a deaf boy to speak. She taught a king to listen. She proved that power isn't about how loud you can roar, but about how deeply you can connect. In a world obsessed with perfection, it was the broken pieces that built the strongest foundation. True love, like true leadership, transcends the senses. It is felt in the vibration of the heart, the touch of a hand, and the courage to embrace the things we do not understand. If this story touched your heart, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more tales of love, destiny, and the magic found in the most unexpected places.